Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for the first of 3 pre-conference webinars being offered in preparation for the upcoming National Permanency Conference, October 23rd and 24th in Nashville, Tennessee. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to go over a couple of housekeeping items related to today's webinar. First, you will notice a Zoom viewer button in the upper left-hand corner of your screen. You can use this button to adjust the size of your webinar screen. Secondly, in the control panel located on the upper right-hand side of your screen, you will see the word Questions listed. Use the plus and minus button to open or close the question box. This is where you will want to type in any questions you have for Allison. The presenter will respond to questions at the end of the webinar. In the event we run short on time, please know that Allison is committed to responding to all questions offline. And now I am pleased to introduce our presenter for today's webinar, Allison Cook Douglas. Allison serves as the Education and Training Coordinator with Harmony Family Center's Adoption Support and Preservation Program, where she utilizes her professional experience as well as her personal journey as an adoptive parent to educate and empower other caregivers and professionals in the field. Allison has been a teacher for over a decade, starting her career as a Montessori-trained early childhood educator. She eventually became the lead training specialist in Knox County, Tennessee, facilitating Parents as Tender Healers classes for prospective foster parents. Allison has been president of the Knox County Foster Care Association, the regional representative to the Tennessee Foster and Adoptive Care Association, served as a team member on a Breakthrough Series collaborative project focusing on trauma assessment and treatment for children birth to age 4, is a certified trainer for Tennessee's Building Strong Brains ACEs initiative, and has recently completed certification requirements for Phase 1 of Dr. Bruce Perry's neurosequential model of therapeutics. Allison and her husband Jonathan are grateful for the parenting journey they share with their 4 adopted children. Allison, thank you so much for taking the time to share with us today.
Good afternoon. I'm so excited to be with you guys today and to spend the next hour together talking about coaching parents in trauma-sensitive discipline. I love to start out on the webcam just so you see that I am a real person, that I'm here today at the Harmony Family Center offices, and soon you'll just be seeing slides, but I just want to have that personal contact with all of you guys listening today. As Nicole said, I am a trainer here at Harmony Family Center and the mom of 4 adopted children who currently range in age from 15 to one who just had a birthday and is now 7. We have 2 boys and 2 girls, so I feel like our family is very, very balanced at the moment, but I have certainly not always felt that way, especially early in placements. And I feel like the experiences that I've had being a mom, being a foster parent, and just being part of a family touched by trauma has really prepared me in so many ways to assist other families in their foster parenting journey and their adoption journeys. So discipline is certainly one of the biggest challenges that parents face as they begin and sometimes even far into their foster and adoptive journeys. Discipline and behavior management is by far the most popular topic of our webinars, of our book collection here at the Resource Center at Harmony, and simply in the calls that I receive from parents who are interested in getting more information or just having someone to talk with about what's going on in their families. And so I know that discipline and behavior management are things that so many families are struggling with, and that so many of you as professionals are just being called upon to assist them with. In my own personal experience of fostering, I was given a list of behavior problems in my pre-parenting training class and then told traditional discipline won't work And then basically we were released into the world. And so my hope is that your agencies are doing discipline in a much more robust way and just preparing these families to parent their children in trauma-sensitive ways. But I want to help us to look at some of the ways that we can do this and ways that we can just coach families. Struggling families don't just need a list of behaviors, and they certainly don't need a list of strategies. What they need is that coaching that a professional relationship provides. Families need instruction. I needed so much information about parenting before I became a parent. But instruction is not enough, especially with children who have a past of trauma, who may have attachment challenges, and who are just in a new situation where everything is strange and different. Parents also need that insight that you as a professional will have about trauma and about parenting in general. And in the end, these parents need encouragement. I need encouragement as a parent, even though this is the work that I do. I just need those people that will say, it looks like things are tough right now, but you've done this before and you can continue to do it, and I'm here while you're walking the road. And so encouragement is that third part of coaching that we need to be really mindful of as professionals. So many professionals get focused on maintaining the placement, which we always want to do, making sure that that child is headed towards permanency, but that won't happen if families don't feel encouraged and supported. So we have to remember that. In the middle of all of the instruction and insight, we have to give these families hope that they can continue working toward a permanency, and then all of us together can see these families succeed. So as trauma-informed professionals, we coach families in understanding the full effects of trauma. This is a quote from a friend, an adoptive parent from Minnesota, Heather. She told me this information this morning when she and I were chatting about the webinar today. She said, I wish I had been given information up front on where to go for mental health services if or when things went south. And I wish I had known a lot more about the effects of trauma and about attachment, how to foster it, and how to recognize when it wasn't happening appropriately. Heather is a parent who is incredibly well educated. She went to MIT. So this is a girl who has it together. She and her husband adopted 2 children, and she's been their mom for over a decade now. Her kids are grown and not living at home anymore. They've gone out into the world. And so Heather is a parent who is capable in many, many ways, and she can reflect on her experience and simply say, I just wish I knew more. Her placement sustained. Her children are grown. Their family is intact. However, if she had known more about trauma and attachment, this could have been a much easier journey for her. Parents want information, even when that information may be challenging. We really need to help parents understand that trauma affects children globally. Parents need to know that trauma isn't simply something that happened to the child once or for a year while they lived in a different placement or for 2 years while the child was in an institution. That trauma is an ongoing effect in their kids' lives, and that what happened to them when they were younger plays out even into adulthood. One of the ways that we can educate these families is to introduce them to trauma science and research. When I was training potential foster families, I brought up many times that our families needed to know this information. They needed to have a strong understanding of how trauma affects their children. And I brought up the ACEs study. And many professionals said, well, foster parents don't want to know the science. This is a training that needs to be easy for them to understand. And I would continuously tell them, science isn't difficult to understand if the person giving the information understands it. And so when we as professionals can understand this information and research, we can give this to our families in a way that they too can understand. This can happen in trainings. Here in Tennessee, we are providing a training on the ACEs study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. And my hope is that every professional listening today has a strong understanding of the ACEs study, but I'll give a quick overview. The ACEs study happened in the mid-90s. There was a doctor in California, Vincent Felitti, who determined that many of the patients he was seeing in his obesity clinic had histories of abuse and neglect. He did what good scientists do, and he asked a question. He said, could this affect my patient's ongoing health? And what he did was have a very large study, over 17,000 Californians. He pulled this information together and he determined that when children have adverse childhood experiences, things like divorce in their family, physical abuse, mental abuse, sexual abuse, parents who are incarcerated, parents with mental illness, that those experiences impact the patient long into their adulthood. And so what he said is that as the number of ACEs increase, the risk for negative health outcomes also increases. And so when we can talk with parents about information like the ACE study, they can understand the long-term impact that trauma has on their children. Professionals can also coach parents in how trauma derails their children's development while they are still children. So we know that trauma impacts folks into their adulthood, but we can also help parents understand how their children's current functioning is related to what happened to them before they were placed in the home. The first time I encountered this list called the Domains of Impairment in Children Exposed to Complex Trauma, I literally began to cry. I saw this list, and as I read through these, I could see so many of my children's functional challenges on the list. And what it did for me is it simply increased my empathy for what my children were going through. I began to see things like their problems with boundaries, their kind of ability to tell a stranger more information about their life than they may tell their therapist. I began seeing that not as a behavioral problem, but as part of the way that trauma impacted their development. I began to see things like children who didn't sleep at night as something that wasn't personal. This was part of how their body has changed due to what happened to them before I ever knew these kiddos. And so teaching parents, training parents on how trauma impacts their kids' functioning can increase the parents' empathy for their child and really increase their commitment to meeting these children's needs. It really depersonalizes what is happening inside the family when we can tell a parent, this is not because of something you are doing as the parent. This is not a conscious decision that the child is making. They're not just a rotten kid. Trauma has changed how their body and brain works. And so being honest with families about how trauma impacts development, exposing them to information like these domains of impairment, and just giving them the facts can really help us in the long run. You know, this seems to some professionals counterintuitive. When we look at information about how children's neurological development is impacted by trauma, it may look dire to some of us. We may see that because children's brains develop from the bottom up, that when early trauma has impacted that brainstem and the child is so dysregulated that getting up to some of that cortical functioning, things like having self-control and doing well in school, that may actually discourage families from adopting if they know that trauma has hurt their children's development. But what we see is that when we can explain this to parents, it actually increases their willingness to understand their kids. This is complex material. Um, in my introduction, Nicole said that I had just completed Bruce Perry's NMT Phase 1 certification. That was a lot of hours of work. That is not necessarily what a adoptive or foster parent needs to do. The great thing about this information is that the professionals who created this have made it quite easy to relate to parents. Dr. Perry makes this easy. I can look at this chart as a parent and understand that when things are not strong and regulated at the lowest places in the brain, that of course these upper areas are not going to be working in ways that are typical. There are other folks who do this too. When we look at the work of Karen Purvis, this is incredibly accessible to parents of all sorts of levels of education and from all walks of life. Folks like Diane Malbin, who have written a lot about fetal alcohol syndrome, she makes this information accessible to families. And so when families have this complicated information about how children's neurological development is derailed by trauma in ways that they can put their hands on, in ways that they can understand, it makes life easier for them and their children. When we can see things like this PET scan of a healthy brain, we can see that in this brain, all areas of the brain are active and healthy. But in the second model, we see that areas in the front of the brain in the temporal lobes are underactive. And this, of course, is where things like self-control originate. This helps parents. It doesn't scare them away. It helps to move them from my kid won't comply, my kid won't stop acting up, to my kid can't yet comply, and my kid can't yet change their behavior, or my child can't yet regulate his body. The more information that we have, the easier it is for us as parents to change our mindset, to understand that our children are not just misbehaving, that they are reacting to the trauma that they have dealt with. We also have to teach our families that the timing of developmental insults, so the timing of those traumas, not just how bad it was or how long it lasted, determines the impact on developing systems. So my own personal experiences have been that this is not something that child welfare professionals do a great deal. They don't necessarily teach families that early trauma can have major impact on children's development. When I was actively fostering, a child was dropped off at my home, a little girl. She was about 22 months old, and as the case manager was leaving our house, she turned around and said to me, "Oh, by the way, this kid was sexually abused, but it was when she was about 9 or 10 months old, so she won't remember it," and then left my home. Now, at that point, I had begun my journey into moving into child welfare professionally, so I knew that was not true. I knew that early abuse can impact my child's development, can impact this foster child's development. But I worried a lot that other families may not know that, and that when children were dropped off in their homes and told similar things, this child will not remember what happened to them. That the family then felt that it was appropriate to parent this child just as you would parent any typical child. So they would not worry about things like watching this child more closely, that they would not worry about things like having this child be more likely to find him or herself in a place of abuse later in their life. Our professionals and parents really need to understand trauma. in order to parent these children effectively. And when we can parent effectively, we are then empowered to sustain our families. We can get through really hard places with our families when we have that knowledge that our children can grow, but that they are currently being affected by early trauma. After families really have a handle on how trauma affects kids, then we can coach them as they move toward a trauma-informed view of behavior. And so what we will do is move from this place of having a deep and robust knowledge of the effects of trauma to now seeing how does that play out on a daily basis in the home. This is pretty close to a list that I was given very, very early in my parenting journey of common behavioral problems of kids in foster care. So I saw this list and I knew that, okay, I may be parenting kids who have more behavioral challenges than the children I taught as a kindergarten teacher. Okay, that makes sense to me. The thing that this list did not tell me is why. Why might these children have more behavioral challenges? So when we can change these lists of things like common behavioral problems to something that really reflects the trauma component, then we can look at this with a brand new lens. This is a list of typical trauma responses that children may have. That sounds completely different, right? This moves children's behaviors into a place that these are trauma responses. And what this does for parents is it helps them understand that kids are not going to come to them and say things like, the home that I lived in before was incredibly chaotic. Whenever my mom or dad or whatever adults were in this home came and told me get in the car, it meant something was really unsafe. And that's why when you tell me get in the car, I throw myself on the floor and I start screaming and crying and throwing things and I break your new TV. I've never had a kid in my life do this. I've had lots and lots of children throw themselves on the floor and try to break my TV when I said, hey, it's time to get in the car. When we help families move to this new understanding of symptoms, we can let them know trauma symptoms show up as behavior. Trauma symptoms come into our lives as our children's behaviors. Kids don't tell us that they are in crisis internally. They show us. And families need to know that these aren't just poor behaviors. This is a doorbell, and this doorbell consistently reminds me of one of my own children. This child came into my home at 2 years old. He had no words, he had no language, and he was very, very frightened and very, very frightening. He acted out in many ways. He was aggressive. He destroyed things. He broke things, and he was a tough kid for me to parent because in my mind, all of those things he did were behaviors. They weren't trauma symptoms. And whenever our doorbell would ring at home, this child would ramp up his behavior to epic proportions. So some of the things he did when the doorbell rang were climb our bookshelves, which caused them to topple, breaking furniture, causing all the other kids to lose their minds. He would run into the bathroom, wrap his entire body in the shower curtain, pulling it down and destroying the items in the bathroom. He would dive under the couch, and when he couldn't fit, begin using his fingernails to tear the side out of the couch so that he could get inside. For literally years, I disciplined this child as if he were choosing to do these things. I didn't use corporal discipline because I knew that wasn't okay, but I still continued to discipline him as if these behaviors were something he were choosing. After several years, I had contact with someone from this child's life before he came to live with me. That person told me that this kiddo had lived in a home where there was mass chaos. Someone in the home was dealing drugs, and so there were folks coming in and out at all hours of the night. These folks were not nurturing, loving people who were kind to the children living there. They were very aggressive. The children were hurt by these folks, and so every time the doorbell rang, these kids living in the home were on high alert. That didn't just go away because he came to live in a home where no one was dealing drugs. Those templates were already there in his brain. Doorbell meant possible danger. And so when I put that together, it completely changed how I viewed these behaviors. So for me, a doorbell ringing means usually a box from Amazon, which is an exciting thing, or it might mean a new neighbor is coming over and they're going to say hi. All those things are exciting to me. But for this kid, that doorbell meant he could be hurt. And so changing my lens to know that trauma was at the core of this behavior helped me look at discipline in a new way. I was able to then realize, number one, I have to stay calm. So the child is freaking out. I'm going to be calm. I'm going to go to this kiddo and say, you seem really scared, and then we're going to work on a plan from there. So no longer did I see his behavior as acting out. I saw it as being terrorized by his environment, and it helped me to look at discipline in a new trauma-informed way. Trauma-informed professionals also coach our families by providing some kind of model for appropriate discipline. Most families are going to discipline in the ways that they were disciplined. And even when they're told in a pre-service training that you can't use corporal punishment, you can't use time out, those families are still going to gravitate towards the models that were given to them when they were children, or the models that they've used with their birth children. And so after parents understand the effects of trauma, after they begin to view behavior through that trauma lens, we need to introduce them to appropriate models for discipline. The model that I came up with for myself as a parent, I call SET, but there are tons of models that you can look at, and in fact, most of the models really work together. We could look at Karen Purvis's levels of engagement as a model for discipline. We could look at Dr. Hughes's PACE model as discipline and a way to view discipline. But I'd like to talk to you guys about the SET model today. SET is self-regulation. So parents must be self-regulated in order to engage in any type of discipline with their children. Parents need to examine their expectations and then exhibit empathy with their child and for their child. And then the final part of this model is teaching new and better skills. And so we're going to look at discipline through the SET model. Parents have to self-regulate, and this is something that in my own life as a foster parent, I really was not taught. And so I spend lots of time with the parents that I interact with talking about self-regulation, self-care, and self-knowledge. For kids without the ability to self-regulate, without that internal calm, parents provide external regulation and external calm. So if I'm parenting my children and I'm losing it, my kids are not going to be able to get themselves together. So parents have to understand that what happens internally for them will then translate to the child, and we have to teach our kids to self-regulate. Parents also need to be mindful. And again, this is something that I've learned in more than a decade of parenting kids who came from pretty challenging backgrounds, is that I have to be mindful of my own triggers. What may bother me as a parent may not bother another parent. What bothers me as a parent certainly doesn't bother my husband, and vice versa. And so when we are aware of what pushes our buttons, we can help each other as a couple, or parents who are parenting um, as single parents can find supports to assist them with their own triggers. So helping parents to become really mindful of what pushes their buttons is so important. This can be done in a training setting. There are lots of trainings that we can use, many mindfulness parenting trainings, things like yoga, meditation, just any type of self-care can be helpful for our parents in getting mindful of their own triggers. And then we also have to work with our parents on how parenting opens up their own old wounds. So many parents come to fostering and adoption because they understand that childhood isn't always fun. So many parents come to adoption because they want to make life better for children because their own lives were not great as kids. And so when we make them aware, when we assist them in being aware, that this may open up some old wounds for them, that things like being rejected by your child may bring up old feelings of rejection. It may bring up feelings that you're not good enough if that is something that the family struggles with. We have to help our families understand that their kids can bring up their own old traumas. And again, this can be done in really regimented ways like offering classes, offering support groups, but this can also just be done in a general conversation with a parent. When parents come to you as a case manager or as a clinician and say, this kid is just driving me crazy, we can reflect to them that I wonder what about this is pushing your buttons. And so we have to help our families really become aware and self-aware of their own internal regulation. After parents can be regulated in these moments where they may need to discipline, our job as professionals is to assist them in examining their expectations for the child. Parents can believe that children see the world as they do. I certainly believed that for years after my children were placed with me. I really believed that my kids saw a ringing doorbell as, hey, cool, a package. That's really what I believed. And that informed the way that I disciplined the child. When I was able to understand and then let go of the expectation that my child would see the world as I do, I was certainly able to meet his needs in a much, much better way. We can help families understand that we cannot use logic to help our children out of a really emotional and illogical place. Again, as a parent, I can tell you for many years, I believed that if I could just convince my children they were safe by saying, you're safe, that somehow that would change their behaviors. Logic is not enough. My children needed to feel safe, not know that they were safe, not have a logical piece of information saying they were safe. They needed to feel that. And so when we can coach parents and letting them know, hey, our kids are not going to use logic in the heat of the moment. They are going to be all emotion. And when emotion is high, logic is, then parents can parent better. We also need to help our families understand that their children's chronological, emotional, and developmental ages are not likely to match. And that really ties back into understanding trauma. When we can understand that trauma derails development, then we can really view our children in a way that is so much more realistic. We can say, yes, my child is 15 chronologically, and in some ways, this child may be older than 15. The child may have tons and tons of life experiences and street smarts. So maybe in that way, the child is 22. But emotionally, the child may be more like 10. And developmentally, the child may be 6 in one area and 12 in another area. When parents can see their children in ways that make sense. It helps them to create an environment that meets the child's needs, and it also helps them to discipline their children in appropriate ways. I would certainly not discipline an 18-month-old for crying, but I have seen folks, and I'm sure that I have done this to my own kids, said, "Stop crying, nothing's wrong." Well, emotionally in that moment, the child was 18 months old. And so I love this picture. I actually keep this picture on my fridge. It helps me to really see that, yes, our kids may chronologically be one age, but in so many other areas, they may be all over the map developmentally. When I can see that, when I can accept that and understand that, I can certainly meet my children's needs in a much more efficient way. The second part of our set E is we must exhibit empathy, and we can help coach parents in ways to exhibit empathy with their children. Empathy means we are getting dirty with our kids. We are getting down in the emotional muck. We are getting down in the behavioral stuff. We are stopping when our kid is losing his mind in the grocery store, and we are saying, "You're in distress and you're not alone." When we can help parents to show empathy for their children, it helps kids know you're not by yourself in this. Yes, it hurts. Yes, this place is emotionally scary, but your mom and dad is with you. They are right down there in the mess with you. Showing empathy builds and strengthens connections that are vital to actually having the child respond to correction. Children have to be connected to their caregivers before they will respond to their correction. And another reason that empathy is helpful for our families and teaching families that in the middle of yucky behavior, your job is not to be angry and scold, but to actually show empathy for your child. It will eventually help the parent feel closer to the child. Again, it seems so counterintuitive, but having wonderful professionals who told me, don't distance yourself from your kid when he's having these really big feelings, get as close as possible, helped increase those feelings of attachment that I had for my kids and for my children. So what does empathy look like in action? We can think about resources such as the Whole Brain Child. The way that Dan Siegel explains it is instead of command and demand, we're going to connect and redirect. So in this little cartoon, the boy gets out of bed and he makes a very strange request. He said, "No one ever writes me a note in the middle of the night and I'm thirsty." Now, if this is my child after a long day of work, cleaning the house, doing normal things that you do as a mom, this could be really button pushing, right? And so you may say, "I don't know what you're talking about. I've never written you a note at night. That's not a thing. Go to bed." But Dr. Siegel tells us, this is not what empathy looks like. And so you see this mom who is full of infinite patience, and she has lots of knowledge about child development and how to work with kids. She gets down on his level. She's touching him. She's touching his arm. And she says, "I bet that feels really bad. I wonder if maybe I could write you a note tonight, and I'll bring you a glass of water. And then tomorrow night, we may need to write the note ahead of time, and we can put the glass of water near the bed ahead of time." So empathy in action means we're not simply scolding. What we're doing is attempting to understand. This kid is not really asking for a note and a glass of water. This child is asking to be seen. And especially when we are parenting kids who have backgrounds of neglect, of trauma, of hurt, these children need to be seen. And they typically don't ask for it in ways that are easy for us. They make us do some hard work. And so coaching parents in what empathy looks like in action is a really great way to let them know that giving empathy can help our children to regulate themselves, and it can also cause us to many times not even have to move on to the next step. When we give empathy, our children feel seen and heard, and they can move on to the next task of their day, and then we can also do the same. The T in our SET model stands for teaching, and what we will do is teach our children new and better skills. Many families start here because they believe this is what discipline is. It's the teaching. But they believe teaching just means telling, and that's not true. I'm sure everyone listening has had a teacher who felt that teaching simply meant telling. We don't learn that much when folks just tell us things. What we need to do is think about teaching skills to our children as a whole separate part of the discipline. When we redefine what discipline means, teaching actually becomes discipline. So as trauma-informed professionals, we can coach families in making that happen, in redefining the meaning of discipline. As a brand new parent, I certainly thought that discipline meant consequences. I definitely believed that. But as a more experienced parent and being given the awesome privilege to parent the children that I have, I quickly learned that consequences are not the same as teaching discipline. So many of our parents come to us wanting to love children and wanting to parent children, yet believing that timeout and sticking their nose in the corner and writing, "I won't play with Dragon Balls in class" 170 times are going to change behavior. And that is not typically true for our kids. When I was teaching families who wanted to become foster parents, I worked really closely with a grandmother who was parenting her grandchildren. They were placed in her home as an emergency placement, and she was able to do her foster parent training in the home, and I was facilitating that. She had some really challenging kids, and the kids were there while I was teaching her her curriculum, and so I was able to really observe her interactions with them. And there was a day that I showed up and I could hear the children before I got out of my car. They were incredibly dysregulated, and when I got inside, the grandmother said, "I don't want to do this crazy discipline you're talking about. It's not working." And so I kind of unpacked that with her a little bit. And what I came around to was that she was really still stuck on believing that teaching her child meant the child needed consequences. And the consequences that she was loving with this guy was she was having him stand in the corner. She had drawn a little circle on the wall, and his nose needed to stay in the circle. He was incredibly dysregulated, not just because he needed to keep his nose in the circle, but because this kid did not even have the physical ability to keep his nose in the circle. He had really low muscle tone. He had just a complete inability to be still for the 10 minutes that Grandma was asking him to. And each time she would bring him back to the corner, he was getting more and more and more dysregulated. And so when I was able to talk to her about getting him regulated and then dealing with whatever had happened, she said these words to me: "Actually, I forgot what happened." And that just made me, it really caused me to do some introspection. I felt like as a parent, so many times we get hung up on the consequence, we forget what even got us there. He wouldn't comply with the consequence, and then that became the behavioral infraction. And so as coaches to families, what we can do is really assist our families in understanding that discipline isn't about the consequences. Discipline is about the skill building. So when we reflect back to the picture of the brain that Dr. Perry gave us, where we started with the small square, that's the brain stem, We know that when things have gone wrong in the child's life and that lower area of the brain is dysregulated, everything on top of that is just a little bit shakier. And so when we look at discipline in terms of skill building, we can compare that to this wall. You know, the wall's still standing, but there's a lot of cracks in it. It's not stable, it's not strong. So we can patch up the wall, but what we need to do is get back down to the basics. We need to make the wall stronger. When we can build children's skills, discipline becomes less and less of a problem. Discipline is not about paying a price for what the child has done. It's about learning how to do what we ask the child to do without intervention. And so when we continue to have the child do consequence after consequence, yet not give them the skills to meet our expectations, we're really setting up this child and family for some major challenges. When parents begin that move towards seeing discipline as a way to fill in the gaps instead of make children pay for behavioral infractions, then we can do them a huge service by connecting them with real-world examples. The ideal way to do this is through mentorship and relationships with experienced parents. Parents who interact with other folks who are doing the work on the ground will learn so much about parenting. This can happen in many ways. This can happen as a formal mentorship. Here in Tennessee, foster parents have a mentorship program where they can be connected in a formal way to a more experienced foster parent. This also happens in a lot of informal ways. So an informal fostering mentorship or adoption mentorship could be facilitated by any professional who says, you know, you guys may want to talk. You have similar backgrounds or your families are quite similar. And so you can create these informal mentorships. We can also connect folks to real-world examples and seasoned parenting mentors through things like having training partners. So when a training is happening, we may use a professional, a clinician, but also then having someone who has done this work on a daily basis to support them can be a huge help to them. One of the programs that we do here at Harmony is collaborate with another agency to teach the resource parent curriculum. And that curriculum is created by the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. So a clinician or a master's level child welfare professional would be one of the trainers, and the second trainer is a foster or adoptive parent who is trauma informed. This collaboration has provided so many families with exactly what they needed because we can connect with them. The trainers then can speak about their own experience and not just give information. Folks connect through information, of course, but they really connect through stories. And when families can share their experiences with newer families or with struggling families, that collaboration really strengthens these parents' resolve to make things happen with their children. You know, professionals can do this too. We don't have to just have a person who's been in the trenches as a foster adoptive parent. It can be a professional. One of the things that really assisted me as a new parent, parenting at that time a really challenging kiddo, was having a professional really focus on me in the sessions with my child. And so professionals can do this too. we look at this slide of the typical trauma responses. This is something that parents really get hung up on, is kids who blow up when they get corrected or who don't get what they want. I hear it over and over when parents are describing what's going on with their kids. They'll say, they really lose it when they don't get what they want. So this was me 10 years ago going into a session with my child's therapist. I said to the therapist, every time he doesn't get what he wants, he loses it. And what I was hoping for in that moment, I'm going to be super honest, was for her to say, great, I'm going to teach him how to comply with you. That's what I really, really wanted in that moment. But what she gave me was so much better than that. What she gave me was this. She said, Allison, what would you do if your child was swimming in the ocean and his head went under and you didn't see him? And I said, I would jump right in. I'd go under the water and I would pull him out. And she said, and then what would you do? And I said, I would drag him up to shore and make sure that he was okay. And this awesome therapist said to me, this is what you will do with your child the next time he's losing his mind because he, in your terms, doesn't get what he wants. She said, you know, you can't teach a drowning child how to swim. What you need to do is help your child to regulate in this moment. So she was certainly coaching me in a profound and really life-changing way. And she was not an adoptive parent. We need that connection with families who are doing the work, but we also need pros who can coach our families. So having this person say to me, the way to help your child when he's having an explosion is to help him regulate. Is to relate with him, and then you can help him get to the point of reason. That was so helpful to me. Another way we can coach families with these real world examples is we can tell them, well, if when you say no, the child loses it, let's try not saying no. And of course, the family will think, so this kid gets to do whatever they want. Of course not. So one of the stories that I often share with families when we're looking at this type of behavior is that one of my children used to wake up every morning, well, I guess 3 a.m. is morning, and start screaming for candy. Candy, 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 candy. And I would say, no, go to bed. This didn't seem to be helping because this would escalate the request at a very high decibel for long periods of time. And so what I began to do was to think back to these lists I had been given. And on one of the lists, I noticed that saying no could be triggering. But I didn't really understand what that looked like. So I tried to apply it to this situation. How do I not say no? Because I'm not getting up at 3 a.m. to give candy to this child. And so I got really creative and I said the next time that this happened, of course I will give you candy as soon as we get up in the morning. Now it worked this time. It's not going to work every time, but it worked. By not saying no, I could meet his need. I did need to give him some type of food or snack in that moment, but it was not going to be candy. And so giving folks a list of interventions without teaching them how to actually implement it is not going to be as helpful as being able to do something like have someone there to say, here's how you actually implement this. We look at another of the trauma responses, defiance. This one comes up often. How do we help our families understand how to actually apply this? How do we move from a model to the real world? The PACE model is a great way to address this. But if I told someone simply use playfulness when your child is having a meltdown, they might not understand exactly what I mean by that. But if I show them this, they can understand. This is a picture that was actually taken at my house many years ago when my kid was still playing with toy soldiers. These soldiers were everywhere all over the house after they were thrown in a not happy way. And they stayed there for a while because I was not going to clean them up. I wanted my son to do that. But he also did not want to clean them up. So after a bit, I started thinking, I was getting creative, and I left him a note that said, any soldier not in the barracks at 8 will spend 10 days in the brig. And so after this note was seen, not only did the soldier who was responsible for the men begin cleaning up, but the other children in the house also thought it was really fun and began helping. And so we can teach the model, a model like PACE, but when we can help families understand how to implement it and coach them in this, it just makes it so much more realistic. A few months ago, I was working through the PACE model with a family, and the family said, I don't really understand how to put this into practice because what's bothering me behaviorally today about my kid is that he constantly cheats at Uno. And this was really bothering this mom. Now, I thought, as a parent who's done this for a long time, that doesn't seem so bad. But this parent was really upset about it. And so again, I put on my thinking cap. We'd been talking about PACE. How am I going to relate cheating at Uno to PACE? And so I was like, let's think about acceptance. That's the A in the PACE model, acceptance. Let's accept that what this child needs right now is to win. Let's just accept that. Let's take it out of the realm of he's cheating, he's immoral, he's making it hard for the rest of the family. Let's just accept he needs to win. How can we teach him? How can we teach him? How can we provide him with this experience in an appropriate way? And so I shared with her something I'd done with my own child called Michael's Rules, or we also called it My Way Please, because that's much more kinder than playing by Michael's rules, although that's what we did for a while. And what we would do was set up a game where Michael and Mom or Michael and Dad played together, and the game went by Michael's rules. And if that meant cheating, that was okay because they were Michael's rules. So it wasn't cheating. It was just Michael's rules. And we did that quite a lot. We would spend special playtimes together where the rules of each game were Michael's way. What that did for Michael was help him feel in control. It gave him that experience of winning. It created this really positive bond between him and myself, or him and my husband, because we were doing it his way. He got his needs met during this special playtime. And so suggesting to this parent, well, hey, let's be proactive. Let's set up a special playtime so that it's going this kid's way all the time during this special time, and it can fulfill the need that the child has to be in control, to win, to feel competent, because this kid does not feel competent most of the time. And so helping put the model into terms that the family can understand is just incredibly helpful and will help them move along this trajectory from being punitive, from being based in what's this kid doing wrong, to being accepting of where the child is and helping them learn the skills to move forward. Other things that seem to be challenging when we look at some of the behavioral models out there are kids that resist change or transition. Well, how do we do this in a way that's helpful to a family? How do we give them the skills to do this? How do we coach them through that? Well, we can teach them some trauma-sensitive interventions. And again, we can provide the family with this model. Here we see we're using Dr. Perry's R's, rhythm, repetition, relationship, and rewarding. And before the child goes out of the house, he plays a drum beat with Dad. And so we're providing this way for the child to make a transition. Using visual schedules, doing some physical activity at transition time. For a while, we drew an X on the top step at our home outdoors, and when the child was leaving the home, he would have to do 10 jumping jacks on that step, or do 2 wall pushes at that step. So it gave them the physical activity at transition time. For children who even find that more challenging, I just started keeping a basket of shoes in my car. So if we need to go without the shoes, that's okay too. Giving families these real-world techniques can just help them feel more empowered. For attention-seeking behaviors, I want to really look at this last bullet point. We need to be with our kids. We need to reflect what's going on in their inner world. True acceptance is simply magical with kids who come from places of trauma. You can see in the lower left-hand photo here, my son is smashing a pumpkin. That is not a typical Halloween activity, but in my world, that is an awesome Halloween activity. Acceptance is magical. Accepting that my kid was not going to simply carve the pumpkin, being able to accept that he wanted to do something different. It was something that is pretty atypical, but that was safe, healthy, and helpful for him in that moment is really a neat thing. When my son asked me on this Halloween, where you see in the bottom picture, the other children are carving the pumpkins. That's my mother-in-law in the teal jacket. I certainly, in front of my mother-in-law, did not want to say, yes, smash a pumpkin. I really wanted to say, you sit your little tail down and carve like the other kids. But my husband, who's full of wisdom, said, how do you think that will end? Having a child do an activity that they really are not capable of doing is not going to end well. Accepting that my child needed the physical sensation of smashing the pumpkin was simply magical, because now we have these pictures where everyone in the family was able to enjoy the Halloween. And the end of the smashing was that he brought me small pieces of the pumpkin, drew faces on them, and said, these are my jack-o'-lanterns. If I had made him sit on the porch with the other children and carve, I'm fairly sure it wouldn't have turned out the same. A family seeing this photograph when they are really struggling with their children's behaviors, again, can just be empowering, just letting them know your picture may be different from others, but it's a good picture and a good family. As trauma-informed professionals, we can coach our families through so many areas of knowledge, and we need to assist them in getting to the place that they can take this knowledge and run with it. Every interaction with children is an opportunity for growth and healing, and professionals get to share that with families each day and each time that they work with them. I really appreciate you guys joining us, and have a wonderful day.
We hope you've enjoyed today's webinar. A special thanks to Allison for presenting on such a critically important and timely topic. The recording from today's webinar will be available by early next week. You can access the recording by going to www.harmonyfamilycenter.org. If you would like to receive the PowerPoint slides from today's webinar, please send an email to allison@harmonyfamilycenter.org. We do ask that you request permission from Harmony before reproducing PowerPoint slides. A certificate for 1 hour of training will be sent to each participant via email within the next 7 to 10 business days. Lastly, if you have not had opportunity to learn more about the upcoming National Permanency Conference, I would encourage you to do so today. Dr. Bruce Perry will be our keynote for this exciting and innovative conference. You will not want to miss it. You can find more information in the link to the NPC registration site by visiting the Harmony website. Thank you again for joining us today, and please plan to join us at 1 p.m. Eastern Time on Wednesday, August 9th for the next pre-conference webinar. Take care and have a great rest of the week.